My name is Itai Milstein. I'm VP of Marketing at Mad Brain Games. My role is basically to grow our games.
Many Americans, by the way, mistakenly believe that the President of the United States is a man by the name of Joe Biden, right? I think most people probably think that, this guy here. But of course, that's not true. We all know that guy, the actual President of the United States, is a man by the name of Antony Blinken, which is this guy. This is the real President of the United States, regardless of the fake Secretary of State title that he holds. He's actually making America's foreign policy decisions, delivering those messages right to world leaders. Last week, flying to China, demanding that they stop supporting Russia, then to Ukraine to make sure that Zelensky knows, hey, more money is on its way. Don't you worry about a thing. We've got more money coming to you as part of our CIA-run war in Ukraine. And then there's, of course, his vice president is a man by the name of Alejandro Mayorkas. He's in charge of domestic U.S. policy. So see how this works? Blinken is in charge of the foreign policy. Mayorkas is in charge of domestic policy, working in lockstep, by the way, bringing 10,000 tens of thousands of illegal immigrants into the United States, displaced Palestinians into the United States out of the Gaza Strip. This, of course, was always the plan, which you'll see in a moment. But both of these guys report to a man, their boss, by the name of Benjamin Netanyahu. But he doesn't live in America, where maybe you live. He lives in a place called Israel. That's why President Blinken has been racking up so many frequent flyer miles to flying to Israel over the past few months. He's going to his remote office on a regular basis, his WeWork location in Israel. Here he is. That's why last night, once again, Blinken arrived once again last night at his WeWork office in Israel to talk to his boss, Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the last time Blinken stood before Netanyahu, he said, "I stand before you as a Jew." Those were his words. When Biden was set to pick Blinken as Secretary of State, of course, Israel was very happy about this. They loved this idea. In fact, the Jewish Journal said, quote, "Blinken, 58, has been one of Biden's closest policy advisors for over a decade and espouses the opposite of Trump's America First agenda."
So that means America last?
Yes. So we like him. This is why we stand behind Blinken, because he is really anti-America First, literally in the Jewish Journal, and echoed across.
So by that we can deduce he'll be putting us first?
No, he'll be putting
the Israeli readership.
I guess. I don't know. I mean, It's not America he's putting first. Don't think that for a second. So Blinken is anti-America First. Got it. We got that. That's why they love him so much. By the way, as Colonel McGregor points out, Americans are beginning to figure out that they have no real representation in Washington. The two parties are quickly becoming irrelevant. The truth is, we have one party, the Uniparty. So
yes, that's clear to me increasingly every day.
Yeah, and I think as we get through the end of today's segment, again, in this segment that I'm talking about here, they really want to pit one against each other, right? But I want you to, again, go 30,000 foot level. Why are they doing this? Why is this all happening right now? Hey, Camel Toe Hunter, thanks for becoming a rebel. Welcome to the rebellion, Camel Toe Hunter. Thank you for becoming a member of the Redacted Rebellion.
Hope you get that worked out.
Yeah, hope you get
comfortable.
Hopefully get your camel toe worked out. But thank you for subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it, Camel Toe. So on the Blinken agenda, during this meeting, a few big points to further drive America into the ground. So you're meeting with Netanyahu. What are you going to be talking about? Clearly, first on the agenda is moving thousands of displaced Palestinians out of Gaza before they're killed in Rafah to settlements designated by the United States and Israel. This has been part of the plan for a while, including free flights and free passage right into the United States.
Apple reported better than anticipated Q2 earnings results, with the iPhone declining about $5 billion on an annual basis, in addition to the same for overall revenue, but the device actually growing in mainland China according to CEO Tim Cook. The iPad also declined, but that was to be expected given that the device had not been updated since the end of 2022 and that new versions of the iPad Pro and iPad Air are coming next week. Services in the Mac were bright spots on Apple's earnings report, bringing in growth to the iPhone maker compared to the year-ago quarter. One negative was the wearables, home, and accessories category. That fell about $800 million. Luca Maestri, the company's CFO, said this was due to a tough compare from a year ago when the Apple Watch Ultra and the second-generation AirPods Pro saw strong sales in the second quarter of last year. Analysts and Apple executives were all very clearly excited about the prospect of Apple moving into generative AI. Apple plans to announce a slew of new AI features at its Worldwide Developers Conference on June 10th. For Bloomberg News, I'm Mark Gurman.
If you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread. Just to end on this, if you had a message for Christian leaders in the United States, whether in government or in churches or just citizens who care about the religion and their fellow Christians, what would it be?
It would
Support a if you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread. Just to end on this, if you had a message for Christian leaders in the United States, whether in government or in churches or just citizens who care about the religion and their fellow Christians, what would it be?
It would be to remind them that when the state of Israel was created, it was not created on an empty land. It was created on a land that had millions of indigenous Palestinians there, including Palestinian Christians. And that state they support, that state they celebrated as a fulfillment of prophecy and a sign of God's state to the Jewish people. For it to become a state, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, were forced to leave and have never returned. Churches were closed. A friend of mine did the research and counted more than 30 churches that were closed when Israel was created because
if you wake up in the morning and decide that your Christian faith requires you to support a foreign government blowing up churches and killing Christians, I think you've lost the thread. Just to end on this, if you had a message for Christian leaders in the United States, whether in government or in churches or just citizens who care about the religion and their fellow Christians, what would it be?
it would be to remind them that when the state of Israel was created, it was not created on an empty land. It was created on a land that had millions of indigenous Palestinians there, including Palestinian Christians. And that state they support, that state they celebrated as a fulfillment of prophecy and a sign of God's state to the Jewish people. For it to become a state, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, including Palestinian Christians, were forced to leave and have never returned. Churches were closed. A friend of mine did a research and counted more than 30 churches that were closed when Israel was created because Palestinians were expelled from the land. Our numbers continue to be in decline. So we're pleading that come and listen, come and talk to us. And my message to Christian leaders right now is there is a very, very brutal war taking place in Gaza, a war that I described using the word genocide, because it's a war that has used even starvation as a mean. And fellow Christians are suffering because of that war. It's time that Christian leaders recognize that wars is not the way, whether in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. When will we learn that war does not help? When will we take Jesus' words seriously about being peacemakers, about being merciful? There must be other ways. And so it would be an invitation to listen, to learn more, and to avoid very shallow and simplistic perspectives that are not based on scripture itself, but more based on political equations. And I would plea right now, and I will continue to plead that we need to stop this war in Gaza. It's killing many, many children, women, innocent lives. It has to stop. There must be other ways. And as a follower of Christ, we have to pursue the path of peace and justice, and we have to avoid simplistic polarizations, good and evil. Come and listen, come and understand what's happening. And I plead as a Christian pastor from Bethlehem, I plead that you come and listen.
Father, thank you for your thoroughly decent and sensible analysis, and I hope it's heard by Christians throughout the West. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Obviously, very good point that a lot of the bad news was already priced in. Therefore, you're seeing that reaction in the stock and revenue beat, iPhone beat, but you are seeing some still significant declines across product categories. With the iPhone in particular, Luca Maestri told me one of the big difficulties here is a difficult comp, a $5 billion disruption that was due to some supply chain issues that led to some delayed sales, which means, again, the comparisons are a little more difficult. But the headline from Mark Hall really was that he said, we expect to grow low single digits in the June quarter, and they're going to be talking about that a little bit more on the call. So all the folks out there wondering, is Apple still a growth company? At least for the June quarter, Apple is predicting they will be.
Let's talk about China. Romain was mentioning earlier, Greater China revenue in the second quarter, $16.37 billion, down about 8% from a year ago when analysts were looking for $15.87 billion. So that is a better than expected print for Greater China. But that region, that market for Apple has been a source of a lot of concern for investors. Did he give any color on what their prospects are in China?
Absolutely, Scarlett. You're looking at a $1.5 billion decline in China and APAC. Separately. In China specifically, he talked about that disruption. You're seeing some impacts there. But he said, we're actually happy with our results in China. Specifically, he said this is the most competitive smartphone market in the world, without a doubt. But we feel good about the results. He talked about Tim Cook being in China recently, the new store they opened in Shanghai, the level of enthusiasm for the brand being very strong. The fact that they had the top-selling smartphones in the quarter. They set a record for upgraders. So he said the reality is very different from what you read at times.
So, Emily, I'm scouring right now through these press release and presentations to get all those fat numbers that we're supposed to see off that Vision Pro headset. I don't know if you have one of these things here, but talk to me a little bit about the wearable strategy. I mean, I'm kind of being facetious. We know it did not quite take off as quickly as maybe they expected here, but are they standing by that strategy? What did Luca tell you?
I've tried the Vision Pro and I thought it was awesome, but I didn't buy one myself. So maybe that tells you something. You know, the wearables category was weaker despite the launch of the Vision Pro and some of the mixed reports about the Vision Pro. We talked about that, and again, he said it's a tough comp. He said that last year they released some new AirPods, some new watches. Those were very popular, but overall that they're still very excited about the category. It's grown a lot over the years. In fact, it's doubled in revenue over the last 5 years. So that launch compare was tough. And we also talked a bit about AI. Obviously, WWDC, their big developers conference is coming up. They're going to be talking a lot about AI there. He said they think it's a great opportunity. It has a lot of potential. It's where they're making significant investments. And this is going to be really important for Apple. Can they build in new features, better software that gets people really excited about upgrading, replacing, or even, coming over to iOS as a platform?
Good morning from London. This is Bloomberg Markets Today. I'm Anna Edwards alongside Guy Johnson and Kriti Gupta. With the cash trade just less than an hour away, here's what you need to know.
The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, has said the UK will give at least £3 billion worth of aid to Ukraine every year for as long as necessary. He made the comments in Kyiv while meeting President Zelensky.
In terms of what the Ukrainians do, in our view, it is their decision about how to use these weapons. They're defending their country. They were illegally invaded by Putin, and they must take those steps. We don't discuss any caveats that we put on those things, but let's be absolutely clear. Russia has launched an attack into Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely has the right to strike back at Russia.
Our correspondent James Waterhouse joined us from Kiev a little earlier. I asked him what kind of a difference Lord Cameron's comments could make for Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine has always needed Western help to carry out its fight. But what's really interesting about Lord Cameron's comments, I mean, he's clearly in a hawkish mood during his visit to Kiev. He basically said Ukraine has the right to hit targets inside Russia with the weapons, with the missiles that the UK provides. That is not a view shared by other Western allies. It's actually a condition applied to their support that Ukraine doesn't hit inside Russia. Why? Well, with Ukraine hitting energy infrastructure inside Russia, there are fears of energy prices rising, but also the West has always been fearful or wary of an escalation in some way. You just need to watch Russian state TV to see how they point out or allude to the fact that they've got a sizable arsenal of nuclear weapons. So the West is keen to keep this war within the boundaries of Ukraine. But we are seeing Ukraine hit Russia with drones it makes domestically. Nevertheless, this is a sizable offering from the UK and a sizable commitment. £3 billion a year for as long as it takes. He described this war as being the biggest challenge of a generation. It will include long-range missiles like Storm Shadows, which Ukraine has used effectively on occupied Crimea. It will use air defence. It will involve air defence equipment that will be used by teams you see in Ukrainian towns and cities as they try to take out drones launched by occupying Russian troops. So this will be welcomed. There is also part of the money will go towards restoring Ukraine's energy infrastructure. But look, trips like these are welcome, and I think this is the UK trying to keep the pressure up on other Western allies to say, look, you know, we should all be doing as much as we can to keep Ukraine in the fight.
Well, we can now speak to the Ukrainian MP, Lesia Vasilenko. Thank you for joining us on BBC News. I wanted to touch on some of what James had to say there, particularly the comments from the British Foreign Secretary that the UK would support Ukraine using British weapons to carry out attacks within Russia. What kind of a difference would that make for Ukraine? Is this something that Ukraine has wanted?
It's a huge difference. The attacks carried out on Ukraine are mainly originating from the territory of Russia. So for us, being able to hit back and destroy the sources of the attacks would actually turn things around immensely, especially for those regions bordering Russia, like the Kharkiv region, like Luhansk region, the Donetsk region, all of those regions. We could potentially not just keep the people there safe and secure, but we could actually push back on Russia's occupation of those territories and even free those territories.
But would this really raise the prospect of an escalation in the conflict?
Russia does not need reason to escalate. Russia escalates when it sees fit and when it is ready to escalate. I would like to remind everyone that this attack Ukraine is fighting back on has been unprovoked from Ukraine, either in 2022 nor in 2014 when Russia's aggression first started. So again, Russia needs no provocation. Russia will continue attacking for as long as it is able to attack. This is why it is crucial to actually destroy those sources from which Russia is launching the attack, those launch pads inside of Russia, and also the launch pads that Russia has created within its the territories of Ukraine that it illegally occupies today.
And the UK now promising £3 billion of aid every year for as long as Ukraine needs this. I'm sure this will be welcomed within Ukraine. Do you think this will put pressure on other Western countries to step up support for your country?
Hopefully. Hopefully this, as well as the phrase that Ukraine is to protect itself in whichever way it sees fit, even by attacking targets in Russia. The UK has often been the forerunner of aid to Ukraine. the Storm Shadows, the long-range missiles, the Challenger tanks. The UK was the first country to give Ukraine the tanks that were needed on the battlefield, and then other nations followed. So similarly with this aid, there is great hope that all the other countries that are helping Ukraine today, militarily, financially, that they will follow suit and that they will increase their spending or their investment in a collective security by giving more to Ukraine for as long as it takes, but also by taking away that clause that the weapons are only to be used within the territory of Ukraine.
And just briefly, Lesia, of course, we've seen more aid coming from the US as well. Is that having an impact on the ground where we've seen Ukraine lose territory over the last few months?
Hopefully these territories will be regained, but it will take some time. It's not overnight that the weapons get delivered. It's not overnight that the aid gets delivered. It should be there by the end of 2024, but there's always the question of when will it arrive in its bulk form. So we are hopeful, the front lines are hopeful in Ukraine, and we are ready to use those weapons as soon as they arrive.
Lesia Vasilenko, thank you for joining us.
European earnings continue with SocGen reporting a profits beat as equities traders help lift results. We'll speak to the CEO of Vestas and the Deputy CEO of Crédit Agricole this hour. Apple jumps after hours as it forecasts a return to sales growth. The iPhone maker announcing a $110 billion share buyback, the biggest in US history. Plus, traders pull forward Fed rate cut bets by a month to November, ahead of today's key US jobs report.
In the meantime, a quick check on the markets here. We are seeing green on the screen for your stock 50 futures, higher by 0.4%. Slight underperformance by the FTSE 100, but nothing to write home about. Still higher by 0.2%. The currency picture is interesting. 107 euro dollar, 125 on cable. Markets today starts right now.
Friday the 3rd of May, good morning. Ferrari is out with a new V12. It's very pretty. I bet you it sounds amazing. In other news, Apple's out with an epic buyback. We're going to talk about that a great deal, I suspect, throughout this show. What does it signal about this company's future? What will Warren Buffett make of it this weekend? It's Jobs Day in the USA. We're looking at the headline number coming in at circa 240,000. What is the Fed going to make of that? And the French banks. French banks are having a very good morning this morning. What do we make of all of this?
Yeah, I can't believe you went with the Ferrari line. I mean, it is Friday, so...
It is Friday. We can talk about Ferraris. It is very pretty.
You are entitled. I take your word for that, Guy. In terms of the prettiness of the French banking earnings, yeah, not at all bad, it seems. And really interesting to think about the interest rate story when it comes to, in particular, Crédit Agricole, because they're limited in the extent to which they can pass on the rate hikes during that rate hiking cycle that we've seen. And so that limited some of the upside potential, I suppose, in relation to others. But does that also mean that the losses are limited on the downside when we start to see the ECB cutting rates?
Well, the stock market really holding that up, to your point. But Crédit Agricole, I remember from last time around, they also had underperformed on the fixed income side. That continues as well, this time posting a 3% decline, to your point, in their FIC revenue in the first quarter
as well. That looks good, doesn't it?
Well, it's sort of
that's beaten Wall Street.
Yeah, well, on par with Wall Street, the number
3.4 down was Wall Street.
Yes.
So that looks pretty good to me. The Crédit Agricole cost-income ratio is sensational. You look at what they're doing in terms of what they've taken out in costs. These numbers are absolutely amazing. And you compare and contrast it with SocGen, which has got a long way to go on that cost-income side. Then it's really interesting in terms of what the two French banks are having to do at the moment. Crédit Agricole is way ahead of the curve in what it anticipated. SocGen's got a long way to go.
Yeah, in terms of that FIC line, though, Chrissy, yeah, you're right that they do have a history of outperforming, although it's not such a large part of their business as it is for others. But they do have that history of outperformance. But yeah, maybe they're not looking quite so bad this time around.
I'm curious about this equity story, though. It's because SocGen as well posting their profit off of that as well. I'm curious why is this just kind of the entire markets around the world are outperforming and therefore they're getting in on the rally. I've traditionally not seen this kind of equities outperformance drive profits to this extent.
Volatility. We're starting to get some. It's a pickup. You look at what's happening with the VIX. You're starting to get some trading opportunities. Maybe that's where this is ultimately coming from. There are other aspects, obviously, of that business. I think again, you come back to these banks. What do they want to be? and trading profits continue to be such a big part of the narrative. Is that something that shareholders should reward or not reward?
Right. Well, and what do they want to be in the future in a different sort of with a different macro backdrop? So, for example, capital markets activity, M&A activity, that's all been really sluggish and still is, according to SocGen. Even though anecdotally, I don't know, it feels sitting here in this seat like we talk about more IPOs and there is a little bit of a brightness coming through in capital markets. We talked about that with the CEO of Barclays not long ago, but even he's saying, you know, we need another month or two to sort of feel really excited about this. But we do have another business coming to market from Spain today.
Yes, the Pooch IPOs, as I'm told it's pronounced. It's interesting because then if you look at some of these French banks, SocGen, is Credit Agricole really even positioned to take advantage or capitalize on that capital markets activity? Barclays maybe, but I'm not sure if SocGen and Credit Agricole are maybe IPO facing, for example, as Barclays is.
We're going to be talking to the Deputy CEO of Credit Agricole. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Jerome Grivet is going to be joining us at 7:30 London time. Intercontinental's out with numbers as well this morning. Diageo is interesting. The Intercontinental numbers don't look good. RevPAR, I always love that. Revenue per available room, plus 2.6, the estimate plus 4. So they've missed a little bit there. It's all right. Taylor Swift's coming to Europe next week.
So it's
going to be
fine.
absolutely fine.
And you'll find out just how fine if you stay with us until, 8:30 this morning. We're going to talk to MasterCard. They've done some analysis on just what kind of boost you get to restaurants and hotels from just Taylor Swift being in town.
Stay tuned, folks. Guy Johnson's going to sing for us live on the air. We're all very excited about that, aren't we?
I don't think anybody should be excited about that. And no, that's not going to happen. It may be Friday, but I'm certainly not in the mood to sing just yet. We can listen to Ferraris if you want. I'm very happy to do that.
Excellent. We'll provide that soundtrack. Can we talk about Apple?
Let's
please. Okay?
Yes.
I thought some of these things were interesting. I mean, the fact that it's the biggest buyback in US history, that's got to catch
Would
your
Steve
eye.
Jobs have done this? Probably not.
Give us the answer.
No. I don't know. I don't know. But this is a company that is kicking out so much cash that.
And obviously, CNN takes every opportunity to slip in some pro-pedophilia content among the rest of the trash they peddle. According to the network's chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, who was suspended briefly for masturbating live on a Zoom call in 2020, pedophiles caught with child pornography should get lighter sentences these days because the internet made them do it.
Can I just add one point about these kiddie porn cases? And this came up, I remember, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney back in the 90s, is that when those sentencing guidelines were written for those cases, this was a time when the people who committed these crimes would order individual photos and then get them usually through email. And then they would be sentenced based on the number of photos they possessed. This was all pre-internet. So once the internet came in and people got access to hundreds and then thousands of photos, the sentencing guidelines would reflect hundreds and then thousands of photos. Federal judges have been struggling with the issue of how do you create a fair system that was designed pre-internet that was, yet you have to sentence people post-internet. And what I thought Chairman Durbin pointed out is that judges across the country, including Republican-appointed judges, have been saying, look, we can't apply the rules that were designed pre-internet for an internet society. And many judges have been giving somewhat less sentences as a result. And I thought that was a very clear explanation of why Judge Jackson imposed sentences that were all prison sentences. It wasn't like she was letting these people go, but they were somewhat less than the guidelines because the guidelines had not been adapted for the internet era.
You can't make this up. We haven't even got to the head of the snake yet, Hollywood. The entertainment industry. Responsible for brainwashing the masses for decades, Hollywood is widely understood to be controlled by
welcome back to our coverage of the local elections, where the story so far is the Conservatives losing council seats to just about everybody. They also lost the Blackpool South by-election, but they did hang on to that all-important mayoralty in Tees Valley. Ben Houchen re-elected as the Conservative mayor of Tees Valley. Now, counting is currently going on in the East Midlands for the East Midlands mayoralty there. That is an important one. It's a new one, newly fought, so all to play for. But the Labour Party, Labour sources are calling that for them. They are saying that their candidate, Labour's Claire Ward, has comfortably beaten the Conservative MP, Ben Bradley. And it's a key one because it does cover quite a few of those battleground parliamentary seats. Let's take you now to Gloucester, shall we, as well, where counting is currently going on in those local elections as well. The Conservative Party really hoping to maintain control there. They've got a majority of 3, but frankly, it would take a miracle, I think, for them to hang on in Gloucester. The Labour Party, if they're serious about winning the next election, they need to win in Gloucester. So we'll bring you that result as soon as we get it as well. In Welling and Hatfield, it was a poor night for the Conservative Party. It remains under no other control, but look at the seat breakdown. The Labour Party have gained 8 seats and the Lib Dems 2 in Welling and Hatfield. The Conservatives down 10. And remember, of course, this is the constituency of one Grant Shapps, Defence Secretary. So all eyes on what happens in Welling and Hatfield in the general election. And the last one I want to show you is Castle Point. The Independents have held on to Castle Point, but it's a wipeout for the Conservative Party. They've lost all of the 8 seats they were defending, the Independents picking up all of those. So I think perhaps telling the story at a council level of the Conservatives, yes, losing seats to Labour, but losing seats to other parties as well, including Independents. Right, let's take a quick look, shall we, at some of the day's other top stories now, because the King and his niece, Zara Tindall, have been seen sharing a hug at the Royal Windsor Horse Show today. The popular equestrian event was a firm favourite with his late mother. It's the King's 3rd appearance this week after he resumed public-facing engagements on Tuesday. The government must rewrite its climate action plan after the High Court ruled it isn't doing enough to reach its targets. The joint action brought by 3 environmental charities argued that the Energy Minister signed off the government's climate plan without evidence it could be achieved. But the Department for Energy and Net Zero says the ruling doesn't criticise its current plans to meet net zero targets. China has successfully launched a lunar probe to land on the far side of the moon. Well, the mission is hoping to bring some of it back down to Earth, in fact, to try and gather some more information on the evolution of the moon. It's just the latest advance in China's increasingly sophisticated space exploration program, which is now competing with its American equivalent. Police have arrested more than 2,000 people during pro-Palestine protests at college campuses across the United States. President Joe Biden has defended the right of students to peacefully protest, but condemned the disorder of recent days. Protest organisers, some of whom are Jewish, call it a peaceful movement. The Irish Prime Minister, Simon Harris, has met Stormont's leaders, the First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, and the Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly, during his first official visit to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland restored its power-sharing government in February when the DUP ended its 2-year boycott over post-Brexit trade wars. 4,000 patients in England with sickle cell disease will be offered a life-changing treatment through the NHS from today. The inherited blood disease affects the shape of red blood cells and their ability to function. The new drug's been described as transformative, and it can significantly improve people's quality of life by reducing pain and also increasing energy levels. Take that and become the latest stars to cancel shows at Manchester's Co-op Live Arena. The band said that delays to the opening of the new arena have forced them to move their gigs this month to a different venue in the city. This is Sky News coming up. As the vote counting continues, I'll be speaking to the Conservative MP Damien Green for his reaction following a series of losses in the local elections for the Conservatives.
always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance, and a sense that history was being made.
We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
I've seen people who believe and strive for the American dream, even in the face of disaster.
I'm very pleased to say we can bring in Anke Rengen, the co-heads of Global Financials at RBC Europe, for a deep dive on these European banks. And Anke, I know you've been following this since Deutsche Bank on Friday, so it's been no doubt a busy week for you and the team through this week. Top line, what is the impression that you get? What is your take in terms of the health, the resiliency of this European banking space, and whether that resiliency, if that's what we describe it as, can be sustained in the quarters ahead?
Yeah, so I mean, it was really like eventful 2 weeks, I can say. And I mean, I think the key thing is that we really post Q1 results saw earnings upgrades. And that was coming from a number of sides. I mean, interest rates are staying higher for longer, which has helped. The banks kept costs under control, and also asset quality has been quite resilient. Capital distributions were somewhat expected, but clearly the banks are offering quite an attractive yield. But to your point, what comes next, and what comes next for bank share prices? I mean, the rate cuts are imminent for the end of the year in various regions. And I think the key thing is here, there's still an element of rates being higher than in the past that help net interest income going forward from the hedge effect. Plus, there's the expectation that if rates come down, volume growth can pick up. So that can offset probably some of the headwinds of the lower rates. And plus, what was quite really encouraging in the Q1 results is that other revenue lines like fees, investment banking, asset management, also quite good momentum. So going forward, there seems to be good momentum. But to your point, I mean, the share prices have gone up. Yeah. And valuations are probably less compelling than in the past. And also to your point, there is still economic uncertainty, and we certainly have some events later this year which could impact market volatility and valuations. So we're probably more selective on a stock basis, but I think there is a good reason to be constructive on the earnings momentum.
Okay, really interesting. The momentum's still there. There's the potential challenges, but it sounds like you could also get a scenario which you're outlining potentially of a bit of a sweet spot for these lenders in terms of slightly lower rates, maybe trading activity picking up as well. On the trading front, the equities desk of one of the French banks today performing very well, even as fixed income was a little softer. How much activity? Are we at a turning point in terms of the capital market, in terms of IPO, M&A? Is that coming back with force this year?
I mean, it's certainly, Q1 trends are very strong, and the pipeline seems to be building. So I think the market is still very fragile, and there's probably a seasonality in the trends as well. But so far, so good. I mean, it seems to be some M&A building, ECM, and that could be supportive. I mean, on the corporate lending side, the volumes are still relatively muted, and that probably needs an acceleration in economic growth. But capital markets seems to be more constructive in positioning.
And on M&A, Sabadell, BBVA, it's a potential takeover, hasn't been confirmed, hasn't been locked in. I just wonder the broader signal it sends, potentially, about that long-awaited for consolidation within European banks. Is it a catalyst?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some peculiarities because BBVA tried to combine with Sabadell before. But I think it definitely will bring back the debate on domestic consolidation. I'm not sure it's a catalyst, but there's definitely going to be in focus.
Okay, and on the buyback story, which has proven some momentum as well for the stocks of these companies, 2.5 billion coming from ING in terms of euros, that's just one example. HSBC coming through 3 billion. As you said, not a big surprise, it was expected, but does that continue? Do they have the balance sheets to continue to be able to hand cash back to shareholders in the quarters ahead? Is this sustainable?
I mean, some of the excess capital has been eroded over time as banks have returned, but as return on capital is strong, that generates capital and can be distributed. And I mean, buybacks are obviously a nice yield, but also help the EPS growth. So in a favorable operating environment with earnings growth, I think they're sustainable. I mean, the uncertainty is always regulation, but hopefully in Europe, the cloud is
there's more visibility.
On regulation, I wonder if you have a view on this, because the UK obviously about 6 months ago lifted the cap on bonuses, and we've seen HSBC, the AGM is going to happen, Goldman Sachs pushing through and removing that cap, just broadly without necessarily talking about individual banks. Is there a challenge that the UK is posing now to European lenders in terms of attracting talent? Do you see any material change as a result of those adjustments around bonuses that could see some UK lenders being a more attractive place for some of that banking talent?
I'm not sure that's the. I mean, I suppose you need still the business volume to generate that revenue and bonus, which is a function of revenues.
Okay.
So I mean, it can be one of the factors. I'm not sure it's the deciding factor.
Okay. And just briefly before we let you go, you touched on some headwinds for the European banking space. What stands out to you? The things that could concern you, the things that could trip up these banks in the months ahead?
I mean, yeah, economic growth is still very fragile, and clearly some of the countries are not growing very strongly. And I mean, political.
News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moscow. Breaking economic news crossing the Bloomberg, and the April jobs numbers are in. U.S. employers scaled back hiring in April, and the unemployment rate unexpectedly rose, suggesting some cooling is underway in the labor market after a strong start to the year. Non-farm payrolls advanced 175,000 last month, the smallest gain in 6 months. The unemployment rate ticked up to 3.9%, and wage gains slowed. Futures are jumping on the news, with S&P futures up 1.1%. Now to our other top stories, with shares of Apple rising. This after the company surprised investors with a decent beat on quarterly revenue from China and announced the biggest stock buyback in U.S. history. We get more with Bloomberg Intelligence senior tech analyst Matthew Bloxham.
Given the reality is that Apple isn't an out-and-out growth stock anymore, you need to be kind of offering something, and obviously by doing a buyback rather than obviously they have a dividend, but it's very small. It's about a half a percent yield, maybe, that that actually the buyback helps to give earnings growth a little bit of a momentum whilst they wait for the kind of the product refreshes to kind of help the top line. So yeah, it's getting a lot of focus. I think the reality is that Apple is a huge cash flow generating machine. It's still got a net cash balance that isn't going to disappear anytime soon.
And that's Bloomberg's Matthew Bloxham. Apple also gave a stronger sales forecast and predicted its iPad and services business would grow by a rate in the double digits. While Amgen's shares soaring after its chief executive said he was very encouraged by early results from a study of the company's experimental obesity drug Maritide. That's hurting shares of Novo Nordisk today as Amgen's news gave rise to concerns about potential new competition in the rapidly growing field. Donald Trump to return to Manhattan court today for day 11 of his hush money trial. Lawyer Keith Davidson concluded his testimony yesterday after spending nearly 6.5 hours on the stand over 2 days. He laid out for jurors details of his negotiations with Michael Cohen and the National Enquirer on behalf of Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, not shying away from an election night realization that his efforts might have contributed to Trump's 2016 win. Well, this weekend, the former president will be at the Four Seasons in Palm Beach, parading some of his top running mate contenders before his wealthy donors. Bloomberg government Zach Cohen reports Trump may have narrowed his VP picks down to a short list.
They include Senators J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Tim Scott, as well as North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, who, Burgum and Scott both ran for the Republican presidential nomination this year and fell short. Rubio obviously had run previously all the way back in 2016, but all four obviously seen as rising stars in the party and somebody that can help Trump, appeal to constituencies that he's not getting now, to appeal to donors, especially given the fact that he is spending many weeks in the coming months in courtrooms rather than on the campaign trail.
And that's Bloomberg government Zach Cohen in Washington. Trump has also said he'll announce his running mate closer to the Republican National Convention in mid-July. With student protests over the Israel-Hamas war disrupting campuses nationwide, several major universities are intent on ensuring that commencement ceremonies go off without a hitch this weekend. It won't be easy. Colleges are hiring extra security, screening attendees at venues, and emphasizing that significant disruptions by pro-Palestinian protesters will not be tolerated. At the same time, they're pledging to honor free speech rights by designating protest zones. Well, more than 2,000 people have been arrested nationwide at campus protests over the war in Gaza. At least 20 arrests in NYU and Manhattan this morning. One student there saying police went too far, clearing an encampment.
They showed up in riot gear. I mean, they're wearing riot gear right now. We're screaming, we're yelling, we're loud, but it doesn't warrant a warfare type response.
The NYPD also tried to clear protests at the new school in Manhattan following the crackdown at Columbia University earlier this week. The drive up I-95 could be tough through the weekend. The major East Coast highway is shut down in southern Connecticut after a tanker truck fire damaged an overpass. Officials hope to have it fixed by Monday. Again, U.S. stock index futures are rising, bond yields falling after the latest jobs report added to confidence the Federal Reserve will be able to start cutting rates this year. S&P futures up 1.1%, Dow futures up 1.33%, NASDAQ futures up 1.6%, and the 10-year Treasury yield at 4.46%. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Karen Moscow, and this is Bloomberg.
The countdown has begun. This May, 1,000 global leaders will gather in Doha for the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg, held in conjunction with our official partners, the Qatar Ministry of Commerce and Industry and Media City Qatar, and premier sponsor QNB. Join heads of state, influential ministers, and leading CEOs to make new connections and gain unique insights. Learn more at QatarEconomicForum.com.
Greetings everybody and welcome to